As a master of the horror story, Edgar Allan Poe is known throughout the world and often linked with places such as Baltimore and Richmond. But it's only in the past few years that he's been reclaimed as a Boston native, thanks to a work of public art at Boylston and Charles Streets. A lecture will take place later this week on the art, the author, and his relationship to Boston. Our guest is the longtime supporter of the project, who's giving the lecture, a street lecture at least. We'd like to welcome the founding president of the Edgar Allan Poe Foundation of Boston, Dan Currie. Thank you very much for being with us, Dan.
It's very nice of you to have me, Chris. Thank you.
A lot of us grew up getting introduced to Poe when we were students, even before high school sometimes. But what made you a fan of Poe?
Yeah, well, that's typical. When I was in school, probably around the 5th grade in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, some 20 miles from here, I wasn't all that interested in school, at least the academic side of it, until one day we were assigned readings. I think it was The Telltale Heart, his famous short story, and his poem, The Raven. And it really fired my imagination, and so it gave me a sense that, this is something that, I'd like to know more about, and that, gave me a feeling that sort of I had my own Poe, or one could have their own Poe if they found something that really interested them and sort of enabled them to hopefully have someone to mentor them, to pick up whatever, does interest them personally, such as, a pen in the case of Poe, but it could be anything, a fishing rod, a makeup kit, a lawnmower, a scalpel. So this idea that everyone has their own Poe has always been fascinating to me. And I also have sort of in my own life, this appreciation now for how there are parallels between my own biography and Poe, in the sense that he was born in Baltimore and...
No, you were born in Baltimore.
I was born in Baltimore,
right.
Excuse me, I'm confused. And right, but he was born in Boston, so sort of this reverse thing. And then he ran away from home in the South to come north to Boston, and I also ran away from home when I was 17 and to come to the big city. And there are other sort of parallels that gives me a sort of a personal sense of investment, and I've always been a fan, as you say. So fast forward, it was 2008. I saw a story on the front page of the New York Times which talked about the upcoming bicentennial of Poe's birth, and how the city, people in the city of Philadelphia wanted to, I think they were planning to go to court to try to get a judge to allow them to dig up Poe's bones and bring them from Baltimore to Philadelphia. And, by that time, of course, I was aware that there were other cities such as New York and Richmond and Boston, of course, who also had an interest in Poe and a claim on him to some degree or another. And so I thought to myself, we'll see about that. And maybe the Boston in me sort of got me involved in then,
Well, talk about the notion of Poe that was pretty common. Here he was, the grandfather of the Southern Gothic, and who didn't like the Boston Brahmins and the Transcendentalists, the Frog Pondia. But what about that?
Yeah, well, of course, Poe has a reputation for hating Boston, and that arises from he was not only a short story writer and poet, but he was a great journalist and critic, and he was invited to Boston in 1845 to give a poetry reading. It so happens in the same location where his mother and father had performed for many years, much earlier before he was orphaned when he was 3. He probably wasn't aware of that, but he got terrible reviews from the local critics. Although other people said that it was a fabulous performance, I think some of the critics had it out for him because of his criticism of members of the literary establishment in Boston, such as Longfellow and Hawthorne and others, with whom he had a great disagreement about the purpose of poetry and art. And so Poe was one of the forerunners of art for art's sake, whereas the Boston literary establishment was interested in art and poetry as almost as lectures or as opportunities to convey lessons about morals and patriotism and et cetera. So it was a very interesting debate that they had, but I think it was a professional one as far as Poe was concerned, although reading his vitriolic writings, you might think it was personal, and I'm sure it was to an extent, but the details of Poe's biography and his relationship to Boston in that just so completely, it seems to me, contradict this stereotype, really, that I think it is, that Poe hated Boston. And so, I mean, starting with, as John F. Kennedy once said, every man has a special place in their heart for the place they were born. But going right down the line with the fact that, that his forefathers and, his grandmother and his mother immigrated to Boston and got their start on the stage in Boston before he was born. And then he was born in Boston when they came back to his mother and father to perform on the stage. The mother, before she died when he was 3, left him with a memento, which was a painting of Boston Harbor that she had done. She must have been quite an artist in addition to just on the stage. And on the back of this painting, she had written, for my son Edgar, for my young son Edgar, that he may ever love Boston where his mother found, for my little son Edgar, who should ever love Boston, the place of his birth, and where his mother found her best and most sympathetic friends. So, I mean, he carried that with him for the rest of his life, and but was adopted by a family in Virginia after his mother died there, as I said, when he was 3, and was taken in by a family that, gave a wealthy tobacco merchant family, and gave him a great education, and so, I'm sorry, I was going to say...
We're talking with Dan Currie from the Edgar Allan Poe Foundation of Boston. Dan, talk about the public art that now stands near the corner of Boylston and Charles Streets in Boston, because we're putting him on the map here. Why this particular place?
Well, the location of the statue, which we hope everyone will visit at some point, and maybe hopefully even come down to the talk we're having, which is a free outdoor event on this Thursday, the 27th of October at noontime. It's just the perfect location for this statue, which is, we're just so proud of it, and so proud of Boston for having put it up, and in large thanks to Mayor Menino, who was a big supporter. But it's located in what has now been designated by the city as Poe Square at the corner of Boylston and Charles Street, and it faces. It's a block and a half from the from the house where he was born, down in Bay Village on South Charles.
Just a few blocks away from there. Right?
Well, not even 2 blocks, right behind the New England School of Law, and as part of the preparation for submitting our application for the public art, we did a survey of the entire neighborhood, an environmental survey, a survey of all the nearby architectural features or other statues or works of art and the landscape, the whole history of all of that. And it's amazing how it's such a good fit in terms of just so many ways. As you might stand by the statue, you'd realize that at one point, it's no longer there, but there was the train station from New York, from Providence, from the south, terminated right there across the street at the corner of, right on Charles Street behind the Four Seasons Hotel.
And I guess you could also say this is on the fault line between, Brahmin, Boston, and on the other side, the relatively wilder side.
Yeah.
Going back, I'm thinking of Hillbilly Ranch here. But
exactly. That's a very interesting point. Because it's true, if you took a look at a map of Boston or a satellite photo of Boston, you might become aware that if you drew a red line from Roxbury Crossing right through the city all the way to North Station, that line would go right through where the Poe statue was located. And if you think about it, as you were saying, on one side of that line is, you know, the theater district, Chinatown, the Hillbilly, you know, all these great, sort of the demi-monde, Jack's Joke Shop, the Playboy Club, the Coconut Grove Lounge, you know, all of the theater district, as I said. And I could go on with the, you know, immigrant communities, the docks are over there, you know. And then on the other side of that line, I mean, there's the front yard of the Beacon Hill mansions that are, that line Beacon Street, which is, I tell you, the Boston Common, I just describe it as their front yard. But I mean, there's, you know, all sorts of private clubs, the Union Club, the Algonquin Club, the Athenaeum, the State House, where the laws were made that effectively criminalized the profession of Poe's parents as actors, because the Puritans, of course, way back when were...
Which means we've got a figure here who, not unlike the new Nobel Prize for Literature winner Bob Dylan, somebody who straddles the, you know, the highbrow and the well, you know, the downside.
Yes, I think so. I really do, and that's another reason why I think the environment is just so perfect for this statue, because he is walking, it appears, you know, between those two worlds. And you know, I mean, you could interpret the statue as if he's walking away from the establishment and into the, you know, his mother's, or walking the other way. And so I think it's sort of a fabulous kind of symbol for how people can, you know, come together, whether over, you know, after an argument such as he had with the community, or even today, I think people can consider how to come together if we might just listen to one another.
Well, and there's more listening to be had on Thursday. So exactly what time and place should this be?
Well, it's at noontime at the corner of, in Poe Square, which is at the corner, the southwest corner of Boylston and Charles Street, right across from the Common.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Dan Currie will have more news in just a moment.